the pandemic. This project is made possible with funds from the Decentralization Program, a re-grant program of the New York State Council of the Arts, with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, and administered by Huntington Arts Council. Support has also come from the Puffin Foundation, which has actually supported other events at Hofstra University, and the Professor Edgar H. Lehrman Memorial Foundation for Ethics, Religion, Science, and the Arts. Grant funds are being used to pay performers of the work, which we expect will be done live sometime within the next 6 years. We say 6 years because the shoe worker Niccolo Sacco and his friend, the fish peddler Bartolomeo Vanzetti, were arrested, as everyone knows, in 1920 and executed in 1927 for crimes they had not committed. The worldwide commemoration of the centennial of their ordeal, which was played out on the world stage and etched their names indelibly into Italian and American history, thus began in 2020 and will run through 2027. 50 years after the execution in 1977, as many of you know, then Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis exonerated both of them. 25 years after that, Hofstra hosted a conference on the case, the proceedings of which appeared in a 2005 volume representing SACCO and VANZETTI, in which Marianne Trasciatti was a co-editor, and Len Lehrman has an essay about the completion of the opera, his work in the completion of the opera. And co-chair of that conference, as I said, and the co-editor is Marianne Trasciatti, who will now give us some background on the case itself. Marianne.
Thanks, Stan, and thank you, Leonard, for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to speak at the New York premiere of, it was a pleasure for me to speak at the New York premiere of your opera, The Triangle Fire, at the Long Beach Library. I can't believe it was 4 years ago, and it was a wonderful event. And that's, of course, a moment in history with special meaning to the Italian and Jewish communities, from whom most of the victims of that disaster came. And it's, of course, a special event, an important event for me as well. It's also a pleasure for me to be with you once again, and I thank you so much for having me and for our enduring partnership. And it's a pleasure for me to speak on a subject that is also close to my heart, and that is the case of SACCO and VANZETTI. It's a terrible and also fascinating chapter in US history. It's the story of two Italian immigrants, Nicola Sacco from Puglia in the south, a skilled shoemaker, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti from Piedmont in the north of Italy, a pastry chef turned fishmonger. The two men were not closely connected at the start of this story, but by the end, their names were linked for eternity. And they were typical immigrants in many ways, typical Italian immigrants. They were men, as most Italian immigrants were. They came from very humble origins. They were working class. They struggled to find gainful employment in the US. And they were revolted by the exploitation and oppression that they saw all around them. It was to them a terrible irony that in a land where some had so much, much more than they needed, so many more were wanting for the basic necessities of life. But in many ways, they were a little less typical. They were radicalized by their experience. That's not to say that no other immigrants were radicalized, but of course not all immigrants were radicalized, and the two were radicalized into anarchism. They embraced the ideas of Luigi Galliani, who was a charismatic militant proponent of the idea that there can be no justice and no equality, no human flourishing in a capitalist state, and that it was one's duty to overthrow that state by any means necessary. Sacco and Vanzetti refused to serve in the military during World War I. They weren't eligible for the draft here, but they would have been eligible to serve as Italians. They would not feed the war machine, however. And they refused to bow before their employers or before any of their so-called betters. They imagined a different world, and they dedicated themselves to realizing that world through their connections with other anarchists in the US and around the globe, and through their participation in the labor movement. They were not alone. They were part of a vibrant working class movement against exploitation and oppression that existed in the US at the time. And many of the most active and militant members of that movement were immigrants like them. But after World War I and the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, considerable efforts were made in the US to squash that movement in a period known as the First Red Scare. And this story is intimately connected with that period. On May 5th, 1920, the two men were arrested on a streetcar in Brockton, Massachusetts. They did not know why, and they panicked. And their panic would later be used as evidence of their guilt. On May 31st, 1921, the two were tried for the robbery and murder of a paymaster, Frederick Parmenter, and his guard, Alessandro Berardelli, at a shoe factory in Braintree, Massachusetts. After a trial that was anything but fair, they were convicted on July 14th, 1921. And their case came to the attention of the legendary labor agitator and civil liberties activist Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. She was at the time the lover of another anarchist, Italian anarchist, Carlo Tresca, and he encouraged her on her trip up to Boston to go see the two men in prison, and she did. She was the first American to learn about the case, and she immediately smelled a rat and decided that this was a labor frame-up like that of Tom Mooney, the Irish-American labor activist who was convicted in 1915 for allegedly throwing a bomb during a Preparedness Day parade. And Flynn drew the radical lawyer Fred Moore into the case. And the defense attorney Moore filed 6 supplementary motions for a new trial. He agreed that they had been unfairly tried, and he made it his mission to try them, to bring their case from the law court into the court of public opinion at the same time that he was attempting to get them a new trial. Those 6 supplementary motions that he filed were all denied by Judge Thayer. And as this process is unfolding, as the motions are coming forward and Thayer is denying them, and he kind of had to deny them with the hindsight of history, because to do anything else, he would have had to have admitted that he screwed up when he presided over their case originally. So while this process is unfolding, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn and Fred Moore generate an amazing, unprecedented publicity campaign that captures the imagination and the attention of US liberals and political figures and ordinary people around the globe. Between that campaign to save SACCO and Vanzetti on the American side, the anarchist agitation through the SACCO Vanzetti Defense Committee, led by Aldino Felicani and populated by a number of Italian anarchists and a Spaniard as well. And later in the case, communist propaganda on behalf of the 2 convicted anarchists, as well as the men's own display of dignity, their composure under duress, as evidenced through their comportment at the trial and subsequently their treatment of others, including those who maligned them, and their beautifully eloquent letters. They became internationally known, almost celebrities, although that seems like a terrible word to use. Despite a confession by Celestino Medeiros, a Portuguese convict who was doing time for murder, despite evidence that pointed to the possibility that another group of thugs, or a group of thugs, I don't want to say another, that a group of thugs known as the Morelli Gang was possibly involved in the robbery and murder, Judge Thayer refused to relent. The case was submitted by Governor Alvin Fuller, the governor of Massachusetts, to a panel of esteemed judges that included the president of Harvard and the president of Lowell. These citizen judges reviewed the trial and the evidence and decided that, in fact, it had been fair and the 2 men had not been wrongfully convicted. And so SACCO and Vanzetti were electrocuted at just after midnight on August 23rd, 1927. I thought a lot about this comparison before I was putting my thoughts together, and I think it's an apt one. I couldn't help but think about the relationship between SACCO and Vanzetti in their era and George Floyd 100 years later. Like George Floyd, the deaths of these 2 men sparked outrage. It sparked protests against injustice here in the US and around the world, and demands for legal reform. And like the death of George Floyd in our own era, the deaths of SACCO and Vanzetti profoundly affected the community that felt most connected to them, by which I mean Italian immigrants and their descendants. But it also affected countless others, many artists, intellectuals, and ordinary men and women were radicalized by what they saw as a gross injustice. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that the subsequent decade, the 1930s, which was an extraordinarily militant decade in terms of labor organizing and agitation, I don't think it would have been the same without the contributions of those men and women who were made militant by their witnessing of what they considered to be a horrible injustice. We still don't know. I am of the mind that we don't know if SACCO and Vanzetti were guilty. It's almost certain, I think, that Vanzetti was innocent, but we don't know because the trial was so bungled and so unjust. But that doesn't mean that they deserved the fate that they got, whether they were guilty or not. They deserved justice and a fair trial. But whatever their guilt or innocence, long after their deaths, we still remember them and we are still inspired by them. And I'd just like to end with a paraphrase of a quote, or a reframing sort of a quote by Vanzetti. Their agony was their triumph. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. That was very well done. I mean, to give us a, the review of a very immensely complicated case in historical context in 5 minutes is really almost impossible. But before we move on, I just want to make one point. I'm not sure if everybody caught this. Is it true that SACCO and Vanzetti became anarchists after they came to America? It was the experience of American industrial capitalism that actually radicalized them. So that's something that I point out to my students. They didn't come to America as radicals thinking of overthrowing the system. It was their experience in the system that pushed them to radicalism. And we should also mention that there were two branches or two schools of philosophy of anarchism. In addition to the Luigi Galliani school of, overthrowing the system by any means necessary, there was also a more philosophical school of anarchism represented by Enrico Malatesta, a great hero of mine. I did my master's thesis on him. So I don't want to pass the evening without mentioning Malatesta, who also spent some time in Paterson, New Jersey.
Dan, can I just add two things? One, Malatesta's on the wall behind me. But also, it's a really important point that you emphasize. I did say it, but I'm glad you emphasized it because they were radicalized after they got here. And one of the reasons it's more than just an historical fact. We particularly in the 1920s, but even today, we have the sense that anti-capitalist ideas are foreign imports, that radicalism is un-American, and that, immigrants came here and embraced the opportunity that America afforded them. And I think that the story of SACCO and Vanzetti gives a lie to that the American experience is what transformed them into these extraordinary radicals. It was not something that they brought with them. It was something that living here and working here and seeing poverty and exploitation here, it led them to. So that's a really important point to emphasize.
I remember being told that their families in Italy were not poor families. They were reasonably well off. And so it's just true. They came here. I guess they faced what they faced here, which we all know about.
Okay, thank you for those points. Now it's time to introduce composer and conductor Maestro Leonard Lehrman and stage director Benjamin Spierman, who tell us about Marc Blitzstein's and their involvement with the SACCO and Vanzetti project.
Thank you, Stan, and thank you, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be with you at Hofstra. Ben, you want to say something about that?
Sure, it's great to be back here, even if virtually, at Hofstra, which has been a very important place for my company, Bronx Opera, which has performed over a dozen productions, mostly at the Adams Playhouse between 1998 and 2016. Several members of our SACCO and Vanzetti cast have worked with me previously in various places, particularly Jack White, who we'll talk to later. And Jack and Perry Sussman was also in SACCO and Vanzetti have performed in a couple of Bronx performances, which happen here at Hofstra.
So my own connections with Hofstra are several. My late mother, Emily R. Lehrman, spent 4 years as librarian here, cataloging the Russian collection. In 1961, I became the youngest private student of Elie Siegmeister. Here he is. He was, of course, was Long Island's most prolific composer and the biggest name on the Hofstra music faculty. I attended many of his concerts at Hofstra, and I performed in over 100 that featured his music in France, Germany, the United States, and co-wrote his biobibliography, for which Hofstra Professor Emeritus Herbert Deutsch wrote the foreword. Siegmeister was a great proponent of social consciousness in music. His I Have a Dream cantata is one of the great choral works of the 20th century. And he was the one who inspired me to look at the music of his friend and fellow member of the Composers Collective and fellow student of Nadia Boulanger, Marc Blitzstein. I analyzed Blitzstein's works with Siegmeister and Boulanger and Leonard Bernstein, and ended up writing Marc's biobibliography, editing 3 volumes of his songs, producing 4 CDs of his works, and adapting or completing 21 of them, the most important of which was the one he himself called his magnum opus, the opera SACCO and VANZETTI, commissioned by the Ford Foundation, optioned by the Metropolitan Opera in 1960. 4 years before Blitzstein was robbed and murdered by gay-bashing rough trade on the island of Martinique. Now, Blitzstein had followed and lived through the case as a young man, and in 1932, he wrote a choral opera, in his words, loosely based on the trial, called The Condemned, which he hoped to have performed in the Soviet Union, but it never was. He later drew on that work and others for inspiration in this work and others. There was no question in his mind, Marianne, as to whether either defendant was guilty, especially after he met and talked with Herbert Ehrman, the attorney who figured out and showed that the robbery and murder for which they had been wrongly convicted had actually been committed by members of the Morelli gang. Since so little of the opera was in its final form, there was much speculation for years as to Blitzstein's what Blitzstein's overall design might have been. That mystery was solved, however, when I found in his papers a detailed chronological sketch of the plot, act by act, which he had written in the appendix of his copy of Ehrman's 1933 book, The Untried Case, a book Blitzstein's sister Jo Davis had given him inscribed to Bartolomeo, Nick, and Mark. I'm going to show you what his marks looked like. It's printed in the libretto. This is the appendix in Ehrman's book, and you can see he wrote Act 1, and here he wrote Act 2 at the top there, and then Act 3 for the next pages. And that's how I knew what he had in mind for the structure of the opera. I never met Blitzstein, but I met his sister Jo several times, and I grew to love her as almost as an aunt, and was repeatedly thrilled at the strong support that she and later her sons, Stephen and Kit, always gave me. I spoke to Kit this weekend. I spoke with Stephen this morning for the first time in years. They're still strong. They couldn't be with us, but some of their children are with us here today. Carolyn Erskine, could you put on your video so we can? Hello, Carolyn is Stephen's daughter and executor, and I think Sarah Davis is here too. Can Sarah? Can you? That's Kit's daughter, the youngest daughter. I think I saw her. Isn't she there? Yeah, there she is. Hi. I saw you in Philadelphia, how was it, 4 or 5 years ago when they put up a plaque on Mark's house, right?
That's right, yep.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you guys could make it today.
Yeah, me too, happy to be here.
Ben? You have to unmute. Ben, you have to unmute. We can't hear you. Can somebody help Ben?
Leonard, stop pushing the button so I can do it myself.
I wasn't doing anything. Go ahead.
Another supporter of Blitzstein's work from 1950 until his death in 2002 was Richard Flusser, who was the founder of the After Dinner Opera Company. Tonight we have with us the music director of that company for its final 10 years, which ran from 1991 to 2001, Mr. Michael Pilafian. Welcome, Michael.
Except that Michael has not been able to get in.
No.
He was not sent the link, and I've been on email with him, and he's trying to get in, and he keeps dialing, and he can't get in.
Okay.
So
I wanted actually to say one thing real briefly that there's a little bit of an anticipation of what we're going to see in the video later. The video later is as it was described earlier in Stan's introduction, a concertato production, which was a production, I would call it semi-staged with scores in hands, but it really was, it really was a very good document of what the opera actually is. Our intention when we put it up, whenever we're able to do that, is really to do a full production. No books in hands, more fully staged, maybe the orchestra not on the side of the stage to the extent that we have an orchestra. But so we're intending to do something really complete with with SACCO and Vanzetti really for the first time. But what was done in 2001 was certainly a complete document of what the show is, though not in its fullest final form.
And the opera was done at the White Barn Theater in 2001, the year before Richard Flusser died, and it was one of the last things that the After Dinner Opera Company under him did. The After Dinner Opera Company was actually founded in 1950 with a work by Marc Blitzstein. Marc Blitzstein's very first opera from 1928, Triple Sec. It was a triple bill of Triple Sec, Bach, Coffee Cantata, and Lucas Foss's Jumping Frog of Calvary's County. And in 1991, I conducted, Michael conducted a triple bill of the three Bs, they called it, Seymour Barab's Pizza con Funghi, Blitzstein's Triple Sec, and Bernstein's Trouble in Tahiti, which was dedicated to Blitzstein. So Michael was second pianist for me at the White Barn, and the After Dinner Opera Company also premiered in 1991 an opera of mine called New World, an opera about what Columbus did to the Port Indians, which was subsequently directed in productions at Hofstra Park and the Donnell Library by Benjamin Spierman.
That's correct. Are we ready to bring Mr. Mercer into this fine festivity? We're going to meet some singers who have played or will play, Nick and Bert. First, Hofstra University adjunct professor of voice, tenor, and conductor Gregory Mercer, who I have known since I was a child, when he sang with the Bronx Opera in a few productions in the 1970s, and subsequently all over the U.S. and all over Europe, Prague and Japan. And he was the one who created the role of SACCO in that production at the White Barn Theater in August 2001. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Ben. Hi, Stan. Hello, Leonard.
Good to see you, Greg. You and I go back to 1990 when I was conducting an abridged version of Virgil Thompson's Lord Byron for the After Dinner Opera Company. We wanted you for the title role, but the budget couldn't afford you. But 10 years later, 2000, we asked you to consider the role of Niccolo Sacco. And I remember you sent us to your agent, Larry Wasserman at Disbecker. And you remember what he said?
Yeah, he said he thought he didn't think I could afford to not take the role.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great role, and it's a lead role, and it definitely helped my career at that point.
Greg,
I've done it many times now.
You've sung it many times in excerpts. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of my finest memories of your singing an excerpt was the trio that ends Act 2, Scene 3, and you sang it at our wedding reception.
Right.
Helene?
Well, guess who's here now? I just admitted Michael Pilafian. But before we talk to Michael, or say hello to him anyway, I just want to mention that Greg and I, with Leonard at the piano and singing the role of Vanzetti, sang the Act 2 trio at our wedding reception when Leonard and I got married in 2002.
That's right.
We keep things going that way.
So, Michael, greetings.
Is he on?
We're glad to have you here. You want to unmute?
That sigh is the most zoomy sound ever heard.
Okay, I better mute
We're waiting
myself.
for him to unmute. I want to mention that you've heard Helene Williams Spierman Lehrman to speak a couple of times now. She's a co-founder of the Bronx Opera Company and a midwife to this opera. In fact, she sang not one, two, she sang all the female roles and even some of the male ones in auditions, performances, concert excerpts, and she's also running the tech. She will be doing the screen sharing for the August 19th, 2001 performance. Greg?
Right. So now I'd like to introduce a student of mine, one of three who'll be singing in the production. Christopher Remkus, Hofstra class of 2013, a tenor who's up in Boston, though originally from Long Island, and who has agreed to sing the role that I first sang when we finally do the New York premiere, for which I will be conducting the choruses.
Some of the ensembles, actually.
Right, Chris.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hi. Yeah, nice seeing you. Thanks.
It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting and going over the score with you last week, and we look forward to your stepping into Greg's shoes, so to speak.
Yeah. I say Greg is definitely not an easy act to follow, but I'm looking forward to doing the role. Really exciting. I really love this opera because it's such a great opportunity to do a piece of theater that's also relating to social justice. And my last name, Remkus, even though it's Lithuanian, I do have a bit of Italian ancestry, so that connection's pretty fascinating as well. And I love singing in Italian, so.
And you're going to get to do some of that in the very first scene, which is just after the opening chorus, Chris.
Right. So, Chris, I think you're actually the only current member of the cast whose family background is in part Italian. In 2001, our only Italian cast member was our Vanzetti, James Sergi, who is here today on the screen from Georgia, and whom we are seeing today for the first time in over a decade. It's a thrill to have you with us, Jim. So.
And in our current cast, we have singing the other title role, Bartolomeo Vanzetti, we have our wonderful baritone, Lars Woodul.
Unmute. There you go.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Jim, it was great to see your face out there.
Hey, Lars.
Good to see you. You know, Leonard, Jim and I also taught as colleagues at Wagner College, and it was his fault I got that job. You know, and so we had a great time. And of course, Greg and I see each other at least once a year at High Holy Days out in Long Island. So it's great to see you guys.
Good for you. Did you do High Holidays this year? Ours were canceled 2 years in a row.
We did it virtually. We did a recording of select pieces.
Well, I want to tell everybody that Lars came to us in 2000, having done a lot of research on his own, and was perfectly suited to creating most of the baritone roles in the opera, from the lower class mechanic Simon Johnson and witness Michael Pilafian to the upper class attorneys John and Jeremiah McInerney and William Thompson. But he also sang Vanzetti in various excerpt concerts, and that's the role he'll be singing with us this time around.
Yes, I'm really delighted to be doing this role. I was just going through today, not just for preparation for tonight, but I read again, which I hadn't read in a while, the entire last statement of his court statement posted online, and it's so interesting, especially in what Marianne had to say. You know, that is so specific, and when you bring it all up to date, it doesn't seem like much has changed. So I will be glad to invest some deep introspection into Vanzetti.
Sounds good, Lars. Lars is also the featured soloist on that Siegmeister recording that I showed you earlier. He and Helene did that, which we're also very pleased with and proud of. Now, another role that people remember is one that Helene created, Mary Donovan. She has a kind of an 11 o'clock number in Act 3 as secretary of the SACCO Vanzetti Defense Committee. I wrote that role for Helene. She'll be reprising it. But one other role that she sang, Ruth Johnson, the mechanic's wife, in the very taxing Act 1, Scene 3, that's the hardest scene of the opera, and the only one whose every note was written by Blitzstein. Helene has decided to relinquish that role at this time, and we're very pleased to have her successor in it with us tonight, Karen Jolicoeur, who happens to be married to Lars. Hello, Karen.
Hello.
Now, I want to say I've admired your work and Lars's for the last for 20, more than 20 years. And Lars sang on both our Blitzstein Centennial and the Siegmeister original cast records. But we've yet to have the pleasure of working with you in one of our productions.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'm really glad to be with you all. And I'm sorry our son and daughter have outgrown the possible roles of SACCO son and daughter Dante and Ines. But I do want to let you know, you have another cast member with Italian-American heritage. In fact, my maternal grandfather was a doctor and based in the Boston area where I grew up. So
you're part Italian as well. Jolicoeur is a French name, though, right?
Yeah, right. But his part of the family came from Sicily. They came, they went back, they came back again through Ellis Island, and so
Interesting.
Yeah, Cotone. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. Okay, reference that. So yeah, well, in 2001, Greg's daughter Nicole played Dante, but she's now over 30. So we're looking for a child or two for those roles.
These people keep growing. I don't know what's wrong.
They're above us both now.
Well, then I guess they're really not good to play Dante and Ines.
So we're almost ready to go to the videotape of Act 1, but first we all have to do something. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this, but we're going to try. Karen, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Karen. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
I promised you we would do that.
And look, there's Michael. I see him. I called him with the login ID. There's Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Yes,
Michael Pilafian.
Thank you very much for giving me the updated ID numbers.
I'm glad you got in, and you I think you had the distinction of playing 20. What you were telling me, 24.
I actually counted. I did some archival work today, and I counted up all the chamber operas I played with Richard Flusser. There were 28 of them, and
wow.
This triple sec was number 24 in 1997.
My goodness. Well, it's great to have you with us, and you're part of history, and we're all part of history now. So let's go to the videotape of Act 1. I'm going to summarize the action. In Scene 1, the chorus outlines the story and the work still to be done in the cause of justice. This is the end of the opera. After this, it begins. In Scene 2, Sacco and his wife Rosa are rehearsing a scene from Ibsen's Doll's House in Italian to perform at a strike benefit. Vanzetti enters with two friends, Boda and Orciani, and tells how their comrade Andrea Salcedo was interrogated by police in New York, where he fell or was pushed from the 14th floor to his death. I think that we are next, Vanzetti warns. They all leave to go pick up Boda's car from the repair shop and then collect anarchist literature stashed with friends, which they fear could incriminate and subject them to deportation as aliens. It's 1920, the year of the Red Scare and the Palmer raids. Scene 3 takes place at the Elm Square garage, where owners Ruth and Simon Johnson are on the lookout for suspicious foreigners. Boda and Orciani enter briefly, then leave. Sacco and Vanzetti walk in, are trapped and arrested. The Johnsons demand a reward. When do we get the money? Scene 4 originally depicted the wild debate in the Massachusetts legislature of the 1950s over whether to pardon Sacco and Vanzetti, which became moot after Governor Dukakis' exoneration in 1977. With the approval of the Blitzstein estate, I added a scene with Dukakis at the very end and cut Act 1, Scene 4. In Scene 5, Police Chief Michael Stewart and District Attorney Frederick Katzman interrogate and attempt to intimidate first the defendants and then eyewitnesses. They're looking for 5 suspects, but they only have 2. The 2 of them sing a 5-part fugue. Stewart was still alive when Blitzstein was writing his opera and objected to being portrayed in it. So Mark wrote pure